Welcome to FinOps in Action. I'm your host, Alon Arvat. Each week, I'll sit down with FinOps experts to explore the toughest challenges between FinOps and engineering. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with deep detection and remediation tools that drive action. Hello, everyone. Today, we have a very unique guest with a bit of a different profile for what we used to. He founded and chaired the Cloud and Infrastructure Strategy Forum at S&P Global, and today he is Director of Cloud and Platform Reliability Engineering at S&P Global. I'm happy to introduce you to Adnan Gal. Adnan, how are you today?
Hi, Alan. Thanks. I'm good. Thanks for inviting me to the podcast.
Thank you for joining us. So, Adnan, please tell us what should be the top priority from FinOps perspective of a cloud engineering director.
Yeah. So thanks, Alan, for that question. And that have been, everybody's mind lately since, we have seen recently the state of the FinOps 2025, what have the top priorities in the industry. So as evidently you can see that, people are moving from more of a reactive approach to, proactive, right? Because maintaining something, at a sustainable scale, you need to think FinOps from a design perspective, right? So that's why, since I belong to the engineering world and for some time I have, wore a FinOps hat, so I can, see the pain of the two worlds. So for me, like the top priority should always be, you know, building it right. So you can, scale without having, worry about FinOps knocking on your door that you have something to cracked about. So for me, like that's why I always treat FinOps as an engineering problem rather than finance. So for me, building it right from the start, accurately, that's very at the top most of my priority.
Very interesting. So you put focus on shifting left and making sure your design is right. Do you think that all of the waste problems can be prevented on the design phase? Or even if you're doing a perfect design, you would have to monitor, identify waste, and clean afterwards?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so yes, of course, like you can't control everything from by design, right? There is certainly, ways where you can go and ask the BAU teams to go and look at. And since again, like this is a continuous effort, like you cannot create, thing right and then leave it to the ops and then things will automatically. So it's a continuous operations. So that's why you have to have visibility, show it like where the waste are, and then bring it to the ops team, like if it is a BAU, to eliminate the low hanging fruits. But let's suppose if you
Mhm.
want to fix it at scale, then you have to work with engineers. So maybe we are fixing it at initial stages and making sure that it's everybody's shared responsibilities, not a single person job.
And assuming I'm an enterprise and I'm new to FinOps or I'm new to waste reduction and optimization, would you recommend me to put more focus in the beginning on waste reduction or on implementing the right culture so they will take FinOps in consideration in the design phase?
Yeah, so again, like the framework FinOps frameworks tell us as well, right? You need to walk before you run, right? So you
Mhm.
need to have change, like driving the culture is a change, right? And that's a difficult behavior for every human being to bring in, right? People are not susceptible to change, so that's why you need to bring in changes with something, giving them what's in the right framework, and then slowly adopting that into the practices and processes, so it ultimately builds into your DNA, that it's you don't have to think like second time that this is something we need to do. Just like initially where we had SecOps, right, where we security was a top priority and everybody had to do it. So I think now we are at a stage that we also need to treat FinOps with the same lens, that we need to make FinOps practice at every layer, whether it's engineering, whether it's operations, whether it's finance, right? So that's why it needs to be handled from a that perspective. And again, I'm surprised, if we can have a P1 for a security event, why not for a FinOps event?
Absolutely. It's definitely an event that impacts the business.
Correct.
And Adnas, I'm listening to you, and you put a lot of emphasis on creating process and consistency. I can tell you that I had very similar experience on by myself and people I work with, where like optimizing a certain workload or account or doing a local optimization as a one-off thing. It's easy, it's doable, but the challenge is really making it consistent. Do you have any tips for our listeners on how to create this consistency with the engineering organization?
Yes. So again, as I said, you have to see FinOps from a shift left perspective, right? So those, and since I belong to a engineering space, so if we can have a KPI, FinOps KPI built into our CI/CD pipelines, and while we are creating that, so we will always have a metrics to look at, where we, just like currently we look at security as in one KPI that we need to be mindful about. So similarly, that we need to treat FinOps from the same perspective, right? And again, it's small little things that you need to address, right? Like seeing whether you are building it from the right architecture framework perspective, or whether you are making it from the right business. So again, like for us, the North Star should always be business value that is being driven, right? Whether you are creating for a HTA, application, or is it just a backend that you don't need to worry about. So that's why you need to be mindful about for what is the business value that you are driving for or aiming for. So again, I emphasize, your North Star should not be cost, should not be security, but should be the business value.
Yes, and your comparison to security is fascinating. You also know that I come from a security background. The Finance Foundation like to say that security is job zero, like you gotta have it, and FinOps is a job point five, right? It's like it's high prioritized and right after security. And do you at your job has the responsibility to also balance FinOps and security?
Yes. So that's why, we have adopted a culture that we have a shared responsibility of everyone. So the first most and important piece is bringing visibility to everyone. So that way, because humans are smart, if you show them what is there, so they ultimately, it's almost putting words into their mouth, and they
Yeah.
evidently see that this is something that they need to work upon, right? So that's why visibility is number one. Whether you do it with the in-house tool or external, that doesn't matter, right? But the visibility up to where you have a strong tagging model where everything is charged back, right? So it's very easy to see where the waste is, right? Because often we have seen FinOps chasing owners rather than looking at and working with the right teams. So that's why the governance framework of having you know a strong tagging is very important, so we can address that chargeback model to write down to a resource where we can easily identify, okay, this belongs to certain XYZ application.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I recently talked to a practitioner, Finance practitioner, who told me that like 20% of his time, he's like trying to find the right engineers and chasing them to do things. Now, you from an engineering point of view, do you have a recommendation of how to engage with engineers or what not to do when you engage with engineers?
Yeah, so it's again more of a soft skill rather than an hard skill, that you need to approach. Again, if I'm coming to you, so you need to weigh that spec, where you need to see what engineers priorities are. So his priority might be, reliability and scalability, and you need to keep the application available, right? And the FinOps, like, maybe coming from a perspective of, he need to save costs, but at what value, right? Again, like that, it comes back to that, discussion of business value, right? But if the finance is coming with the, that tone that, hey guys, that you are not doing something right, so that ultimately the first reaction for human is like they become protective, right? Of like, you are dictating something that you you're telling something that the work is not being done correctly, right? But rather than if you come and try to, understand, like, why certain things are there, so they might be able to just understand that, okay, this might be something that we can, look at and work together, right? So that's why, like, having that soft skill is very important, and understanding, like, why there might be, a, a dr at place that, that requires that application to be in ht, and that's why you don't see that utilization there, right? So again, like, having that understanding is very important, and then coming from that soft skill. And what helped me was, like, since I've seen the, better of both world, like I have, been in FinOps as well, and have with the engineers more coming into the FinOps. So I think that friction is becoming less and less, but again, like that soft skill, it really needs, goes a long way.
That soft skill point is really fascinating. I come from a family where both my parents come from the finance world. So I know finance people, they're very, strict, very think about the numbers, etc. I also wouldn't say that like finance people are always the best when it comes to soft skills. But since I started doing this podcast and meeting so many finance people, everyone talk about trust, about empathy, about humility, about how you try to understand the other side. And looks like, FinOps, because of its role between finance and engineering, gotta have these soft skills to work with all the different stakeholders and drive action. I think it's a really important point that you also mentioned here. And Adnan, I actually want to go like, a few minutes back. You talked about the importance of visibility and creating the accountability or attribution from infrastructure and cost to the right teams or groups. And you talk about also about visibility to waste. I wonder from your perspective as director of engineering, when it comes to FinOps, do you lean more towards buy or more towards build? And how do you make a decision of buy versus build?
So yeah, so that's always be $1 million question, like, at every organization. So trust me, like, for me, like, like this is my personal, like, choice. So because building in-house tool, it's a lot of work, so you need to understand what you are going into. So if you are at an organization which have the bandwidth, which have the budget, then, by all means, because whatever you get from the, market doesn't always fit for your need, right? You always has some custom, requirements which doesn't fit, right? So it's a, decision between whether you need to, like, have a very good tools available in the market which can you can work towards customization, or, have it built one time, in house, but it's a continuous lot of work, right? So my always, like, like like tilt has to be towards the, buyer. But again, like, it depends from, use case to use case, like, uh in what size of our organization you are, and, how much effort and, budget you are willing to put into that, uh, in-house tool.
And if I'm listening to you, you're also saying it's not necessarily black and white. You can also buy a tool and augment it with some of, I don't know, some aspect that you build in-house.
Yes, correct. And we have seen that, with some of the tools, go. But ultimately there comes some limitation, like previously, like, the tools in the market didn't have visibility in the container world, right? So that's why we had to go, look for something else, because the roadmap that they had to bring in that visibility wasn't, near enough that a business, it would have met the business requirement. Same goes for the AI world piece now, right? More and more business are driven towards AI, so we need to have that visibility, better visibility into from that perspective. And same goes like like how now we are moving towards cloud plus, where we are not just looking at cloud, but other platform as well, like data centers, SaaS. So that's why I say it it needs to be a conscious decision that if whatever the tool is meeting your business needs or not, right? And if it is, it doesn't matter if it is a in-house or by model.
And Adnan, we were able to go over 15 minutes without mentioning an AI. But now that you mentioned that, we have to talk about it. So, do you think that doing FinOps for AI workloads or AI services is different? And how is it different?
So the fundamental remains the same, right? So again, like currently, FinOps, like the AI is new in the FinOps world, right? And many people are organizations are heavily invested in adopting the AI rather than looking at worrying about cost, right? But certainly we are at a stage that where organization has started like now, like we are away from adoption phase and into realization of we need to like make a good governance framework where we are driven by value rather than just like trying to still invest in adoption, right? So again, like having those fundamental basics still in place is very important, right? That plays, whether it's AI or any other resources, right? But again, like from us, like we also coming from the engineering and we provide the infrastructure, so we have to think from a smarter perspective how we can leverage some model as a service as a solution where we can abstract the AI as a shared model, and where not every application is building their own infrastructure in silos, but coming towards the shared cost model. So again, like it all depends coming back to like keeping to your roots of fundamentals that frameworks focus on, and then adding additional lens of that AI on top of it.
And Adnan, I feel like today we're still in an experimental phase when it comes to AI. And I wonder, what is your advice to all the finance people that are listening to us out there? Do you recommend to I don't know, let the engineers do their thing, do their experiments, and not worry about finance whatsoever at the moment, or the opposite? We're starting something new, something fresh. Let's make sure we have the finance fundamentals from day one. What would be your recommendation?
So again, like number one is like from our perspective comes the security, right? Again, like we have created playgrounds, but with the governance in place where we are not playing at this leverage of security, right? Because we are data driven organization, so security comes first, right? Then comes the second piece where we are enablers, not a showstoppers. So we enable them to innovate, but in a you know loosely couple guardrails where they can innovate, and then at not at this expense of our security or the FinOps, like again, as you said, like comes second in this space, because a lot of experimentation is going on. So we want to let them experiment now for now, right? But in the playground environment where we can easily have a control over the budgets.
Very cool. And I actually want to take you to the first answer you gave and ask you something that I've been curious about for a while, for a few weeks by now. You mentioned the state of the FinOps report in the beginning and the top priorities. And I look at it. The first priority was waste reduction. Second year in a row. The 3 years before, it was engaging with engineers and driving action, which I think when people said that, they meant driving action to clean up waste. So I feel there is a pattern here of something that organizations are not able to resolve in the last 5 years. So first of all, were you surprised about the survey results? And why do you think that like organizations are blocked? Assuming you agree with my interpretation.
Yeah, so again, I agree. Like, even I was surprised when I saw the topmost fees and it was still reactive, right? I was more hoping that, governance would be, as a top priority, again, like, being in that, for the last 5 years, I think we should have evolved to a place where, uh, governance should have been number one, but I think many organizations still are struggling, again, like you said, like you have talked to many FinOps where they don't have visibility, or they have like l- less bandwidth where they are not able to meet the different requirements coming from the business, where you're not just looking at the cloud, you need to look at other platforms to save costs as well. So the 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 scope of their responsibilities are increasing, not at the pace of the resource available. So that's why I think, again, like coming back to that piece, like if you want to like scale, you need to think of agile and automation. So shift left is for me like always been the priority, right? It's, I know, easier said than done, right? Because it needs a lot of investment in architecture, having those discussion. But if you do those things, then you can even be doing FinOps while you are sleeping. So that's why it's important.
I also want to do FinOps while I'm sleeping. uh, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. I can tell you that from my perspective, I also feel that the most important piece, if you want to get FinOps done from the design phase, is to develop the right culture and awareness. And I feel like a waste reduction is a very good way to make it happen, because essentially you're able to show the engineers, look, this is what he did, and these are the outcomes right now. Like we're spending now thousands of dollars every month because you did something wrong on the design phase. So I feel that like waste reduction very often would come before the prevention or doing it in the design phase, because it's an amazing way to raise awareness to the implications of the engineer's actions. Have you tried it out, like showing engineers, the waste, and based on the raise awareness to what are the implications of their actions?
Yes. In fact, if you club it with incentivize, they will go all miles to achieve that phase. And trust me, like making those fun games, having those weeks hackathons, right, where we can just have a FinOps week where we everybody is driving towards common goal of saving costs. So that you know ultimately gives the engineers that boost to go and find that you know unique opportunities which even FinOps might not have been able to identify. So I agree, like again, like the finding low hanging fruit in terms of waste reduction comes first, then rather than driving the culture of uh, uh, FinOps by design, because that is like a much mature state where people ultimately you know aims to be. But again, like walk where you have small wins to show, and then you can finally go towards making it right.
Absolutely. And I know exactly what you're talking about, because at Rapid 7, we had costathons. So hackathons for Finos were called costathons, and we're doing those, every other month. And it's also very complementary to what you talked in the beginning. So in the beginning, you talked about creating process and consistency. But to get to a point where you have process consistency, you have to do some events or highlight situations to raise the awareness. So people will be educated. So you can get to a point where you have this process and consistency.
And don't forget, you can also add additional layer, like some, like sometime people do it for personal reason. If you add an additional KPI of sustainability, so like for me, like that's very close to me, because I want to leave a better greener planet from my children. So that's why, like so you need to then make it interesting for them, how you can drive them to do those go an extra mile to do those savings. So again, like it's all about you adding some interesting KPIs driven, and along with uh incentivize.
And do you feel that the sustainability KPIs actually help you drive engagement, motivation, and action from the engineers?
Sometimes, yes, because like ESG has been very, fundamental piece, and you would have seen from my, some of the engagement that we do in the organization. So giving back and having a sustainable model is very important, and not just us, since our industry is heavily regulated. It's even a requirement coming from the customers. So by all means, that's a important indicators as well. Again, like we are not there where everybody would like that to be, right? That's why you haven't seen that up there in the FinOps states in a very high munch rank. But again, like having that at least there at, just checks that checklist in the box that you are doing things right.
That's great. And you alluded to the fact that you also have responsibility to do FinOps for, I think you mentioned private cloud or data centers, so not only public cloud. And I'm curious if you manage FinOps separately to public cloud and others, or you try to consolidate it into one dashboard, one process, etc.
Yeah, so it's always easier to have a single dashboard rather than looking at multiple. And we have like been there where we had multiples, because the fundamental remains the same, right? And even before the FinOps world, we have been doing, bits and pieces of those best practices here and there, right? What FinOps framework does, it brings those, in a structured way where, everybody is doing in the systematic what the industry is, uh, doing in a community, right? But again, like having that common you know dashboard is very important, that gives you the holistic view of all your waste, all your your budgets, all your where you're spending up to the level of services, and in which provider you are adopting more and less. So again, like having that common dashboard, and again that goes back to your buy versus build. So that you know f- capability is very important while you're making a decision of either in-house tool or buy tool, that you whether you have a common dashboard which can show you all your where you are spending the money, whether it's data center, all the cloud service provider, even SaaS, to the matter of fact.
So you mentioned the similarities, and obviously the principle from Fino's perspective are very similar. But in the end of the day, there are also a lot of differences. So cloud you build, every month based on usage, and it's an OpEx. And data centers you pay once, and it's a CapEx. So how augment both into one consolidated dashboard? Do you have some amortization techniques? How do you go about it?
So that's more of a FinOps question than the engineering. But again, like, for us, like, what we have understood is like, like if you have those measurements done by the FinOps, at the tool level, so it doesn't matter to us from a consumer perspective, like how they are being driven, right? So again, like that question is more falling into the FinOps bucket, where they are working with the vendors and coming up with those definitions, right? To us, everything's means like this is what we are spending on, then this is where we are seeing waste, and this is where we need to work on.
That's great. And Adnan, let's talk about the S&P Global scale. Do you feel like there are specific challenges that come with a scale like yours?
Yes, certainly. Because, like, again, when you talk about scale, you see a lot of challenges. Like, first, like having that visibility, right? Finding that right application owners, whether they are, again, for me, like the fundamental challenge when it comes to the right sizing have been like whether these are driven by all the metrics or just a single fundamental metric that is being driven by either CPU, memory, disk, or whatever the metrics throughput are, right? So understanding how much that right sizing means, and in terms of all the intricacies of that application architecture, whether that are being considered or not. Because it's very good to show to the leadership that we have this much amount of waste in the environment, which is oftentimes hyped. And when you really go into the picture, like details, is mostly what I've seen, like 20% of the waste are real, 80% are just like being driven by algorithms, which is a black box to me even now, being worked upon this industry for so long. So that's why it's very important to understand, like how that measurement of that rice hazing is coming, right? So this is like understanding the definition of that recommendations are very important.
And that's fascinating. And thank you for sharing with us all of your experience so far. I would like to go to the next part of our episode and talk about Adnan on more of on the personal level. So today you live in Islamabad, Pakistan, right?
Correct, that's right.
What's the time now in Pakistan?
What's the time?
Yeah.
It's 9:35 p.m.
Oh wow. So first of all, thank you for joining at 9 p.m. to record the podcast. For me, it's now 12:35. So that's nice. And you went to University of Lahore and got your computer science degree there, correct?
Correct.
Did I say it right? Lahore?
Yes, University of Lahore, that's correct.
Lahore. Okay, Lahore. Okay, great, great. And Adnan, taking you now to your first day of school at the university, what advice would you give Adnan of back then?
Oh, definitely. If I go back in time, I would choose information technology over computer science, because back then, to me, like I just wanted to go into the world of computers, and I didn't understood between what the computer science difference between computer science and information technology was, because I am more of a hands-on guy rather than being a developer's world. So again, like if I was talking to my younger self, definitely I would have been in IT, where I am currently, by the way, eventually.
Yes. And do you feel like the academy needs to do adaptations so it would fit more modern roles? So maybe focus less on coding or maybe focus less on math and doing something that are more practical?
Absolutely. So they, like even from the developing nations, that is the fundamental challenge, that we, you know, what is being taught at our, universities and education sector is not being driven by the industry, what is being, worked upon. So again, like, we are closely working, with the government's help, that, to get fill that gap. Again, going into the universities, or the having the universities alumni come and, work with us for 2 to 3 months to see what we are doing, and go back and update that curriculum. So again, yeah, so that gap is there, especially in the developing nations, and I think people are working towards having that fixed.
I totally agree. And Adnan, before the recording, or my team did some research on you, and they noticed that you do a lot of volunteering work. Can you share with us a bit more about that?
Yeah, again, so like two things are very close to my heart. Like one is like mentorship, where you go, and again, you talked about when I was coming out of the college and the high school and university. So I didn't had that career counseling or the coaching, where what I need to go, what are the next steps, and how to engage with the real world, right? So I felt lost. So that's why, like, coming from the personal background, so mentorship is very important, that I engage with all the community build-ups, these organizations, which are just I said, like, just coming before the podcast, I was in one of the incubation center, where I this listening to this fresh ideas give you something to aspire towards, because uh, this in technology world, things are changing, and when you see those real world in use cases of how AI is helping humankind, so it's really fascinating. And the second is like woman empowerment. Again, like we as an organization have been involved in with US council on in multiple initiative, whether it's multi-billion woman initiative, or elevate her. So again, like those two causes are very close to my heart, and I try to give back to community by spending some time over there.
That's very nice and inspiring, Adnan. Thank you for sharing with us. And I totally agree with everything you said. We were either not mentored, and then we couldn't make the progress we could have made, or we were mentored, and we should give back, because if we got, so we should give as well. And I think today we have only, like, at least in the US, like 20% women in engineering roles. That's very, very little. So there is a lot of work to do there as well. So kudos to you. Great. And Adnan, anything you do outside of work for fun?
Oh yes, spending time with my children playing PlayStation because they are very competitive. So these days they are playing FIFA and they don't even let me win. So now, like, I try to, polish my skills on that.
Sounds like they got it from their dad.
Correct.
That's great. That's great. Anything else? Sports, games?
Oh yes, absolutely. So I belong to a sports background. So my whole, I am an anomaly in the family where I am, the only one who is in the, IT world. But other than me, my whole, generations are, in the squash. So if you see anywhere in the world that you will see, somewhere, my friend, relative, in that field. So squash is very close to me. I myself is a level 2 qualified coach, but
Oh,
it doesn't it doesn't look like from now I play that sport but anymore, but squash is something that it runs in the blood.
okay. Squash is a great game. I love it.
Absolutely. And there are very new, evolving of that sports is coming with the racket, the paddle and, pickleball are coming. So the nature of that, racket sports is evolving and they are very much, fun games are coming into the world. So that's fascinating as well.
Absolutely. I haven't tried those two myself, but I definitely should, on my bucket list. And Adnan, since you're so much into mentoring, assuming people want to reach out to you and ask questions, what is the best way to reach out?
LinkedIn. Yeah. So like I'm very much active on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to, engage in discussion, whether it's, any community based driven, or anything that you need, help on, feel free to ping on.
That's great. Adnan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alan, for inviting me.
For sure. And I also would like to thank our audience who consistently listen to the podcast and all the wonderful insights that are being shared here. If you liked it, please subscribe, rate us, and tell a friend about FinOps in Action. Adnan, thank you again. This has been another really interesting episode of FinOps in Action. See you next time. That wraps up another episode of FinOps in Action. Thank you for joining. For show notes and more, please visit finopsinaction.com. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with tip detection and remediation tools that drive action.